Hi, my name is Patrick Ehlert, and I would like to talk to you about how to make your online presence more green. Let me start by saying that I love the internet. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a software developer and I create internet services for a living, but the internet is really a wonderful invention. Without it, we wouldn't be here today. This conference would not have taken place. And if we were to compare the environmental impact of this year's Europeana conference and compare it to the one held last year, I'm pretty sure that the impact of this year's conference is much lower. And that's simply because there are no people traveling. But the impact of what we do is not zero. And the internet has a larger impact than you may think. To give you some numbers, if the internet were a country, it would be ranked 6th in the list of most polluting countries in the world. And there are two causes for that. First one is CO2 emissions. The internet uses more than 10% of all the electricity generated worldwide. And of all that electricity, about 72% is still generated from fossil fuels. And the other thing is e-waste, which is basically all the electronic devices and cables that are thrown away, your old computer, laptop, cell phones, things like that. Only 17–18% of that is properly recycled, and a lot of e-waste is still being dumped in developing countries. And unfortunately, the problem is growing. Every year, about 61% of new data is being stored in the cloud. And the estimates are that by 2013, the internet will use about 20% of the world's electricity. Another projection is that by 2040, the IT sector will be responsible for about 14% of the world's carbon footprint. So what can you do? Well, I mentioned carbon emissions, I mentioned e-waste, so the most logical things are to look at that and switch to a renewable energy provider if you haven't done so. Another thing you can do is try and use your electronic devices as long as possible, so upgrade them, add new memory to your laptop when it becomes slow. Eventually devices will break down, so you'll have to buy something new. But if you do, make sure that it's easy to repair and you can upgrade it, that it has a long lifespan, and that it's energy efficient. There's actually much more that you can do. If you can somehow limit the amount of data that is being transferred on your behalf, so things that you are sending, emails for example, or things that you are downloading, then you will save energy because that is data that is not being transferred. For example, you can, after this presentation, have a look at your email, look at all the newsletters that you're receiving. Are you really reading all of those? And if not, why not unsubscribe? If you are sending less data, that means that also less data needs to be stored in the cloud. Less servers need to be used, so that is helpful as well. Of course, you can also activate the energy saving settings on your devices. Or you can use a smaller screen. If you're watching a movie on a 50-inch television, that takes about 100 times more electricity than watching the same movie on your cell phone, for example. And when you go online, you can try to find out what is actually the greenest online service I can use for what I want to do. A helpful tool for that is the website carbon.com. It allows you to enter a URL and it will give you a rough estimate of the impact of that website. It is really a rough estimate, but you get some idea. Generally speaking, services from Google, Microsoft, Facebook are doing fairly well. Twitter, Netflix, Amazon, unfortunately not so much. But as I mentioned, it's a rough estimate, and if you are really interested, you should look at what the organization behind the website is doing. For example, a Google search is doing okay, but you have, for example, another search engine called Ecosia, and that is actually a carbon positive organization, so it would be even better to use that. So what can organizations, what can the glam sector do? Well, you could switch to a green hosting provider. There's a good list of hosting providers that use 100% renewable energy at thegreenwebfoundation.org. But you can also look at your hardware and software procurements. For example, for larger orders, you can do an environmental impact assessment. And if you need to buy new hardware, you should really look if it's upgradable, if you can refurbish it. And you can ask your supplier if spare parts will be available for at least, well, say 5 or 7 years. And most organizations, of course, have their own website and maybe also other online services, so you can investigate the footprint of that. Let's zoom into that last part a bit more. Online content creators, what can they do? It's really important to look at the data size of your web pages. The smaller it is, the faster users can load it. So that leads to happier users. But it also leads to better rankings in search engine optimization. The faster your web page is, the higher it will be ranked. So think about the data size of what you're posting online. Text is much smaller than images, and images are again much smaller than video. That is not to say that you should not use video, but if you do, it's important to be aware of the extra impact it has and make sure that it's really worth it. If you look at video and images, you can also try to optimize them, make them smaller. For images, there's a very good website to do that online. It's just called squish.app. And I will explain a bit more about what I mean with optimize. Here we have the image View of Delft by the painter Johannes Vermeer. I found it on the Europeana website, and when you download it, it's really great. It has a resolution of about 6,000 by 5,000 pixels, and if you zoom in, you can see the cracks in the paint, and it's really beautiful. The original file is 9.6 megabytes. If I were to use that in my presentation, everyone downloading my presentation would also be downloading that 9.6 megabytes. So it makes sense to open this image in an image editor, shrink it. I did that, shrunk it to 1200 by 1000 pixels. I saved it with 80% quality JPEG file. And now I have an image that's only 155 kilobytes in size. But I can do more. What many people don't know is that a JPEG file, the size is dependent on the number of details, but also on the sharp edges in a picture. It's a bit technical, but the more details and the sharper the edges, the bigger the file size. So if you're not too concerned with details, if that's not important for your purposes, you can add a bit of blur and save it again, and your image file will be smaller. I did that, and it shaved up of about 43 kilobytes, so I have an even smaller file. But I can do even more. Color information is also something that takes size in the file, so if you save it as black and white, the file comes even smaller. And there's more I can do. JPEG is already a bit older format. There is a small variation called MosJPEG, which is more efficient, can make files smaller. But there are also newer formats. For example, WebP. If I were to save this image as WebP, it will be even smaller. And AVIF, something invented by Google, is also a much smaller file size. But a bit of warning on those last two. Not all services are supporting this yet. I saved this file as an AVIF. I tried to import it into Google Slides, but unfortunately Google does not support it in their slides. Looking at the time here. Yeah, what can software developers do? What you can do is you can make sustainability a factor in your design. And it will be something that's very helpful overall. The result will be that your services become leaner and faster, smaller in size. And I already mentioned that it's important because the faster it loads, the happier your customers will be, and your SEO will also be improved, your search engine results. Something else that you can do is you can consider implementing something called dark mode. So you use black screens that will help save energy from people using your software, your service. But it only works actually for newer types of screen, OLED screens, because their black does not cost any energy. On older screens, LED and LCD, that is unfortunately not the case. It's also helpful to profile your software, see if it's really efficient, if you can optimize it, and caching strategies can also help prevent data from being transferred, so you're saving energy there as well. There's actually so much more you can do. I've barely scratched the surface here. If you really want to make an effort and help, it's important to raise awareness, start a conversation at work, talk to other people about this. If you can start investigating your own footprint, especially for organizations, is something that is important to do. When you do that, when you start investigating, I'm sure you will find something that you can optimize. Just pick one aspect and start investigating things you can do to reduce your environmental impact. And I'd like to finish with the words of Kermit the Frog, who said, "It's not easy being green." And when he means 100% green, he is absolutely right. That is really, really hard. But becoming just a bit more green than you are now is really not that hard. And all you do is just start with it. Maybe there's time for questions afterwards, I'm not sure. If not, contact me. You can send me an email on this address that is listed here. I'm also a member of the European Network Association Climate Action Group. So if you join that, you can find me there as well. Just before this presentation, there was an interesting talk by Barbara Fisher about climate policies. Do check it out. And I've wrote a blog called 12 Ways to Make Your Internet Users More Green, something you can find online. Really into software development, I can recommend the book Designing for Sustainability, Frick. Thank you for your attention.